first is, like usual, we'll do a little meditation, but I wanted to say, what I'm thinking to do is a little bit of a slightly different meditation. So we'll do just a few minutes, a shorter time, doing the breathing meditation. And then what I'd like to do is then actually do the meditation on that we described last class. So the meditation on generating, faith in the teacher, and so we'll use the Dalai Lama as the example, and then we'll go through like how to meditate on that, just so kind of you get a sense of that kind of meditation in an actual meditation session rather than sort of talking about it. So I thought that's more useful. But anyway, so first we'll just do like maybe 5 minutes of breathing meditation just to kind of settle our minds, and then I'm just going to go straight from that into the contemplative meditation. It's okay. So just for 5 minutes, we'll kind of make sure your posture is. First check your posture, your back straight. And then just to settle our minds, we'll kind of bring our attention to the breath. Breathe in before you notice the sensations. Breathing in. Just breathe out. Notice the sensations of breathing out. Thoughts or feelings arise, you notice them, and bring your attention back to the breath. go through this guided meditation, contemplative meditation. We start, first step would be to visualize on the top of our head, or imagine on the top of your head, Buddha Shakyamuni, the body made of light, golden light. He's seated on the lotus, sun, and full moon. His left hand in his lap holds a begging bowl filled with nectar. His right hand is on his right knee, touching the earth touching mudra. He wears the robes of monk. He's kind of radiating golden light. In nature, he's all your teachers. Or another way of saying is, in nature, he's the mind, he's a manifestation of the mind of compassion, wisdom, and skill. Right now they are in the crown in the form of a golden light. Buddha made of golden light. So kind of thinking or imagining, visualizing the Buddha there. Just briefly, we'll do a very brief version of thinking. First, I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. Make countless clouds of offering to the Buddha. I declare or I confess all my negative actions accumulated since beginning this time. I rejoice in the good deeds of the Buddha, the good deeds of all beings, enlightened and unenlightened beings. I request teachers to remain and live long, and to always turn the wheel of Dharma, to always give perfect teachings. Dedicate any good virtue I've created to the benefit of all sentient beings. I will become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. And of course, also thinking of the fears and samsaric sufferings, faith in the three jewels. We take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And remember that we're doing this practice of meditation out of compassion. Compassion for ourselves, and compassion for countless others who are numberless and are suffering. So we may progress along the path in order to be of greater benefit, not only to ourselves, but also to countless others. So kind of abandoning self-centeredness, generating a mind of cherishing all sentient beings equally. We engage in this practice with bodhicitta motivation, compassionate bodhicitta motivation. So then, kind of pleased by your practicing bodhicitta motivation. The Buddha on the crown of your head, from his heart, a very thin ray of light radiates out to the space in front of you. Like the width of a spider web made of white light. And then that from the tip of that light in front of you, appears For now, I'm just going to say, you can visualize other teachers if you want to, or all your teachers. But for now, I'm just to keep it simple. I'll guide the meditation based on His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So So again, if you want to substitute somebody else, it's okay, but imagine, so I'll just say it that way. So imagine that from that light, then the actual form of His Holiness the Dalai Lama manifests in the space. Now we're going to actually do the contemplative meditation. So it's focused on the example of Dalai Lama as the teacher. So one thinks, he, my spiritual teacher, so this Dalai Lama, is actually, he has the appearance of a human being, a Tibetan man, but in actuality he's the Buddha, a completely perfect Buddha. So we say, okay, what's the reason for that? How do I contemplate on that? So the first reason that we think of is that the Buddha himself, and also in the Tantras, Buddha Vajradhara, promised for sure to manifest during this time to benefit others. So then you just begin to think, right? So if the Buddhas have compassion, right, and do manifest to teach and guide and benefit others, then so still thinking of the form of teacher, so it's Dalai Lama, then you think absolutely the Dalai Lama would be that. In other words, if the Dalai Lama is not that manifestation, then it's not, and it doesn't exist actually. Because you think like, okay, who is it, right, on this planet that does the deeds of the Buddha? There's nobody who does the deeds of the Buddha more kindly, more magnificently, more skillfully than the Dalai Lama. Actually, who is it right now, right? Who's preserved? Actually, actually, so many of the teachings of the Buddha would have completely disappeared, after 1959 if it hadn't been for the Dalai Lama being present. Who is it, right, who perfectly explains, right, to thousands and thousands of people, some of hundreds of thousands sometimes, right, who can explain the teachings based on pure reasoning. And when he teaches on emptiness, right, teaches in such a kind of, both on a practical way, in a practical way that people can understand, but also with kind of, presenting the different tenet systems, different ways of analyzing, right, asking deep questions, not just sort of giving some pat answer or some simple formula. But His Holiness, like even in large crowds, right, he presents emptiness in a way that's accessible to beginners, and yet, like even to the greatest scholars, it's thought-provoking. Who teaches the teachings on compassion in this world? Who's the primary person who upholds the responsibility of teaching the meditations on compassion? For sure it's the Dalai Lama. Actually, the Dalai Lama, he teaches the entire also scope of Buddhist practice. So, whether it's to the monks, then he teaches how to be a pure monk. So the lay people, he teaches how to be a good, lay practitioner. Even when he teaches to Christians, he teaches how to be a better Christian. To Muslims, he teaches how to be a better Muslim. Right? When he meets with scientists even, right, he actually, when you read the accounts, scientists' own accounts of meetings with the Dalai Lama, you see both his good heart and his compassion kind of soften their hearts. And then he asks questions many, many times that actually change the nature of their research. So they go from just researching something else, and so many scientists, right, they change then to researching meditation, to researching compassion, to researching empathy, kindness, and so on. To researching the ultimate nature of reality. So, like even when he meets with scientists, and neuroscientists and physicists, then he's able to speak their language. actually change their lives, right? And thereby also change society. And the same thing, even when he meets with politicians, right? Then he speaks the language of politicians without being, you know, while being the main person who actually, one of the main 2 or 3 people on the planet who upholds the approach of radical nonviolence, and radical compassion, and ethics, and morality. So even when he entered, whatever field he enters into, right? And then somehow he brings the teachings on nonviolence, on compassion, on kindness, on reason, on intelligence, on analytical questioning, and of wisdom into that field. And at the same time, when the greatest yogis from the Himalayas come, he can answer their questions perfectly. There's nobody better, you know, all the, like the yogis who meditate up in the mountain caves, and somehow, even though he doesn't have time to go off in some cave, he can answer their questions more deeply than anybody else. And then also like the greatest Buddhist scholars, the people who don't have any political responsibilities, any need to travel all over the world like he does. The greatest scholars of all Central Asia. And none of them, you know, he, like, he's like the sun, right, shining among them. That his level of scholarship is kind of unsurpassed. So for sure, right, if the Buddha is manifesting now, as he promised, then there's no doubt it's the Dalai Lama, right, that the Dalai Lama is such a manifestation. So you remember that, you know, like the nature of a Buddha, right? The Buddha becomes, like they enter the path by generating great compassion, wishing to benefit others, right? They progress through the path to Buddhahood based on compassion, wishing to benefit others. Then they achieve the result of Buddhahood based on their great compassion, wishing to benefit others. So it's the very nature of Buddha that they would continue to manifest to benefit others. So you're thinking about the nature of a Buddha, right? So then if the Dalai Lama is not an expression of that nature, right, then who is? Right? And if the Buddhas don't manifest in some way to benefit us, how can they be compassionate? So for sure, as long as the Dalai Lama is an expression of the compassion of the Buddhas, or is a manifestation of the compassion of the Buddhas. So you generate kind of a feeling or conviction in this meditation. Definitely, for sure, as long as the Dalai Lama, my teacher, is Buddha. So as you're contemplating that, if sometimes a doubt can arise, or a qualm, or a question, you say, well, but it says that the Buddhas, you know, manifest light rays and do other kinds of miracles. And I haven't seen the Dalai Lama do any miracles like that. You know, fly through the sky or without an airplane or something that sort. So in the next stage of the contemplation is that you think, actually, there are different ways to say this one, but we'll say it this way, that actually it's unbelievable that I can see a manifestation as pure as the Dalai Lama. And then there are examples, right? We went through these, even the great Bodhisattva Asanga, when he first saw Buddha Maitreya, he saw him as a sick dog. When Milarepa first saw Marpa, he saw him as a kind of drunk farmer. When there's Devadatta, I think his name was, when he saw the Buddha, he saw him as a charlatan. So there are many other stories like that. You know, when Naropa first saw Tilopa, the great Mahasiddha Tilopa, he saw him as like a crazy person eating live fish or something like that. So actually the fact, you know, and that was due to their impure karma. Right? Even though they were great yogis, they were enlightened, they had impure karma, so they saw the Buddha manifested for them in those kind of those ways, right? So actually the fact that I can see the Dalai Lama, right, a totally pure monk working for peace, continually working for peace, with very pure ethics, right, no kind of confusion there. Actually, it's unbelievably fortunate. It's an amazingly fortunate manifestation. Right? So it suits my mind. It's at a level, the Dalai Lama's form is at a level I can relate to, because he has 2 eyes, a nose, 2 ears. He doesn't have 1,000 arms. Right? He has 2 arms. So it's like a form I can relate to. But actually, compared to those other stories, it's unbelievably fortunate that I can see Dalai Lama in an ordinary human form where he can interact. So he's a perfect, so for me, the practitioner, right, this is how we're contemplating. So for me, he's like the perfect manifestation of the Buddha in this time, in this place, in this planet, to benefit me and others like me. So many, it actually benefits hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people actually. So I think he's actually the perfect way in this time, in this social context, in this world context. It's the perfect way for a Buddha to manifest. So for sure, he is Shakyamuni Buddha, manifest in the form of a monk. So as you're contemplating that, just to bless your mind stream as we continue on, imagine that from the Buddha on your crown and from the Dalai Lama, that 5-colored nectar, light rays with nectar flowing along them, the way rain flows along a taut tent rope. So nectars that are white, red, green, yellow, and blue, that are in the nature of wisdom and compassion, of great bliss and understanding emptiness. They flow into your body. The nectar kind of pours into your body, totally filling your body. So your body comes totally filled with those 5-colored nectars made of, like nectars of light, until your body is totally like pristine, luminous light, like a rainbow body. And then again, kind of turn your attention to the Dalai Lama and the space in front. We'll just do a couple more thoughts before we stop. So we think actually, not only is His Holiness the Dalai Lama, right, a manifestation of the Buddha, actually in nature, enlightened Buddha, but actually he's kinder to me than all the other Buddhas. There have been countless Buddhas in the past, on other planets there are countless Buddhas, and countless other world systems there are Buddhas, but actually none of them take care of me personally. I can't see them, I can't hear their teachings. Buddha Amitabha is in Amitabha's Pure Land, but actually I can't hear even one word, I can't see one smile, nothing. And then Vajrayogini's in Vajrayogini's paradise, but again I can't see her face, I can't hear her words. Whereas His Holiness the Dalai Lama, right, is all the time traveling the world teaching. I can see him in person, I can go to dalailama.com and download his teachings, I can get his books, I can get transcripts, I can download free audio files, I can download transcripts, and there's like hundreds of books by the Dalai Lama and so on. And it's not difficult to see him, right? He comes to DC, New York, all over, actually, everywhere. He goes everywhere around the world every year. So actually he's much kinder to me than all the other Buddhas. It said that Shakyamuni Buddha was unusually kind in coming to this very ravaged, planet that has so much war, and conflict, and it has famines and all kinds of we're also quite short-lived beings on this planet. Shakyamuni Buddha is said to have been unusually brave and kind, but actually Sonis Dhamma is much more kind to us, to me, I think, than Shakyamuni Buddha, because I missed him. I didn't get to see him in person, but I do get to see and hear the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama reveals all the core teachings, all the most important teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha. The Dalai Lama explains them perfectly. So he's much kinder to me than all the other Buddhas, and even than Shakyamuni Buddha. And how is he kind, right? He's kind in teaching, especially the main kindness is that he teaches a path, right? Without him, actually, it'd be like being a drowning person with no life raft, or no rope. I would be like totally engulfed in samsara with no hope of ever gaining liberation or full enlightenment. It's actually absolutely true, right? If the Dalai Lama had died as a young child, then actually so many of the Buddhist teachings would be gone. And actually Buddhism wouldn't be, in the state it's in, I wouldn't be able to access Buddhist teachings hardly at all. So it's only through the kindness of His Holiness the Dalai Lama that I, who am like drowning in the ocean of samsara, and who would otherwise be completely helpless, he's like the helicopter rescue team dropping me a lifeline. So it's only because of the kindness of the Dalai Lama that I get to hear the Buddhist teachings. Even if I hear them from other teachers, right? Actually, those teachers are only able to teach because of the kindness of the Dalai Lama. Actually, it's totally true, right? Because the Dalai Lama is the person who preserved the monastic education system, who also saved all the Tibetan teachers, and so on. Anyway, so it's mainly through the kindness of the Dalai Lama that even one can hear any kind of teachings. And then, of course, his own teachings are so clear. So it's unbelievable kindness of teaching the Dharma and of allowing us to access the Dharma. That's actually the main kindness. But then not only does he give teachings, but he also sets an example. So if it's hard to think of, if you just read those teachings, it'd be very difficult. The Dalai Lama sets an example of kindness, of forgiveness, of patience, compassion. So actually the Dalai Lama is so kind, right? Actually definitely kinder than all the Buddhas, kinder than one's own parents. Not because they don't wish to be kind, but because they can't present that kind of example, that kind of path, those kind of teachings. So actually the Dalai Lama is the most kind in blessing my mind stream, in giving teachings, in preserving the entire Dharma for students like us. It's actually, there's nobody kinder to me personally than His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So you just meditate like that. So you're visualizing the form of the Dalai Lama, and you generate that feeling that he's like my own parent, mentor, best friend, guide, who reveals the entire path to enlightenment. For sure, so you're contemplating, trying to generate that kind of recognition. He's for sure fully enlightened Buddha, manifest to benefit students like myself, and he's the most kind one to me. Like nobody else has shown me the kind of kindness His Holiness the Dalai Lama shows. If you like, you can even imagine since the Dalai Lama is there in front of you, right? You can imagine reaching out and touching his foot, or his knee, or his robe. Just sort of feeling close, that he's like a parent, like your closest friend, your guide, like the person who's lifting you up from drowning in the ocean of samsara. And that's generating that sense, a feeling of devotion which just means seeing him as the Buddha. And of respect, which means appreciating his kindness. And then one more time, imagine the 5 colored light rays with nectar descending into your body, completely filling you with 5 colored nectar lights, so that your body is filled from the bottoms of your feet all the way up to the crown of your head. So your body is kind of in the nature of a rainbow, filled with light, utterly pristine, luminous, 5-colored light. And feel that that light is in the nectar, and nectar is in the nature of fully actualizing devotion and respect, for your teachers. So imagine that you fully actualize those qualities of great devotion, great respect, seeing the Guru as inseparable, or as the Buddha, seeing the Buddha as the Guru, and the Guru as the Buddha, seeing the Guru as the Dharmakaya manifestation, the mind of the Buddha. And so as those nectars and lights totally fill you, you feel that you fully actualize that kind of realization in all the other realizations of the path, but particularly that. And then dedicate any virtue you've created to the benefit of all sentient beings, so that all beings may find perfectly qualified teachers of wisdom and compassion who will guide them to enlightenment as quickly as possible. So I just want to actually go through that way of meditating. So that would be like one session if you were actually going to meditate on this subject, relating to spiritual teacher. And that's actually the way it's taught in, particularly took that from the Easy Path to Enlightenment by Panchen Lama. First Panchen Lama. But I want to just pause there. So are there, before we sort of go on, are there other questions about the meditation or from any of the previous classes in this matter?
Can you do a quick recap of the benefits of seeing your teachers and what the reasons are for it?
Yeah, sure. I want to make sure I don't miss them. So, because in brief, in there it is. So in brief, the benefits are, there, actually there's a whole list. Actually, I was going to say the first one as the summary, but it is a summary, I guess. But so, usually in the Lam Rim, they usually teach 8 benefits of correctly devoting to the spiritual teacher and 8 faults of failing to. But the 8 benefits, the first one summarizes all the others, which is we become closer to enlightenment. And that one's quite clear, right? Because in other words, if you see your teacher as the Buddha and you follow the advice and the teacher's teaching the Mahayana path to enlightenment, then of course you get closer to enlightenment by practicing, right? By seeing the Guru in that way and then practicing. That's actually the main way. And actually, I'll just comment on that one a little further, because so that one says, actually that one has 2 subcategories. We become closer to enlightenment by practicing advice given by the teacher, and then also we come closer to enlightenment by making offerings by serving, by relating, by creating good karma in relation to the teacher. That's the correct way to actually understand that one. So those both help us get enlightened more quickly. And actually the teachings also, this is not usually, this is sometimes mentioned in Lam Rim, sometimes not, but that actually the teachings say that also especially also that those 2 things, right, following the advice, the practice advice of the teacher, and also creating good karma in relation to the teacher, are the fastest ways to get enlightenment. And that's clear actually in the Tantras for sure, it's very clear, but even in the sutras. Like, so for example, in the Perfection of Wisdom in 8,000 verses, there's a story of the always crying bodhisattva. In Sanskrit it's Sada Prarodita, but the always crying bodhisattva is what his name was. And they say, they give the example, it tells his story, like how he desperately wanted to find a teacher, and he searched all over, and he was like looking everywhere for a teacher, and then he heard of this teacher, and then he traveled quite far, but then he didn't want to go and meet the teacher without an offering, but he didn't have anything to offer, so he went through incredible hardships and suffering in order to get, kind of like Milarepa, you guys are reading that, but he went through these incredible hardships to get offerings, and he made offerings to the teacher and requested teachings. It's actually quite funny. Then there comes this point where he asked the teacher for teachings, but the teacher sort of enters into a samadhi, a single-pointed concentration on emptiness. And so always crying bodhisattva kind of sits down next to him and just waits. You know, he's like sort of meditating on his teachers, and he goes, I forget, quite a long time. The teacher is like in this deep, it's just like always crying bodhisattva has to wait a long time. And then finally the teacher came out and he taught him something. And they said just because of the always crying bodhisattva's level of devotion in relating to that teacher, that ordinarily, and this is not tantric, but ordinary, you know, this is the sutra path, that ordinarily it takes, one countless great eon to go from generating bodhicitta up to seeing emptiness directly. And then another countless great eon from seeing emptiness directly to get to the 8th ground, the 8th bhumi. And they said in one session, just in a few minutes, he went all the way to the 8th bhumi because of this level of devotion, that when the teacher described emptiness to him, described the path, he gained incredible realization. But the point there is that happened because of his relationship to that teacher. It was because of these two things, that he practiced his teacher's advice, he saw that teacher as the Buddha, and he actually put it into practice, but because of the relationship with the teacher, it actually happened much more quickly, whereas otherwise it would have gone much more slowly.
Is it just a matter of, then he has more faith in the instructions? Is that what?
Yeah, so his practice was more heartfelt and more sincere and more, you know, like if somebody says, oh, that's cool advice, like, you know, it's like that, right? If you say, oh, that's cool advice, that's interesting, right? That's different, you know, that's different from somebody who's like, you know, like, really feels like that's, you know, like, I'm trying to say it right, like, to give an analogy, right? Like, if you were to say, like, oh, I have a piece of paper in a briefcase that has the cure for all kinds of cancer in it. Like, you know, that you would feel like, wow, like, don't lose that briefcase no matter what. You know, like, it'd be like, no matter what, you can't lose that that sattva, like, always crying bodhisattva had more devotion than that, to even one word from his teacher. Does that make sense? Because to him, this was much more, that was even bigger. Whereas he had that level of devotion where he felt, well, this will cure not only all forms of cancer, it will cure all of samsara for me and for countless others. Because if I follow this advice, then I'll be able to benefit others so much. And that's why he was always crying, is he had so much compassion for others. So he was like totally, you know, he had real bodhicitta, right? So he felt that the suffering of others was so unbearable that he was crying all the time. So that was why he felt, and then he felt this incredible devotion, like, this teacher, if I follow his advice, I can actually free myself and all others, not from every kind of cancer, but also from every other suffering too. It's not just, you know, it's just like, it would include every form of cancer, but everything. So it was like he felt that every word from that teacher was more valuable than that piece of paper in that briefcase. So like, you know, that was how he related to that he would give anything for one word, was like the feeling he had, because he really believed that those words would have that effect. You see what I mean? So you can see how then his practice was not both. First of all, he did practice, but secondly, like, he practiced with incredible single-pointedness and with incredible faith, and not just like, but faith in the sense of like energy, right? Mm-hmm. So that's why it gets him faster to enlightenment, right? So if you see the guru, when he saw his guru in that way, you can see how it benefited him, right? Whereas if somebody else had been in that, maybe, I don't know who else was in that audience, but if there was somebody else in that audience who just thought, you know, like, oh, this monk's kind of cool, you know, cool trip to be here with a monk. You know, like if somebody else were there, like in the same room with always crying bodhisattva, then they would have received the level of benefit of thinking, oh, that's a cool monk, right? Whereas always crying bodhisattva received that level of benefit because he saw his teacher in that way. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So it depended on the level of, and that's, I guess, why, like, also, Gyawa and Sapa, who was the previous incarnation right before the first Panchen Lama. It was like his previous, it was who the first Panchen Lama was a reincarnation of. He said that, he said the great realizations, he was somebody who like Milarepa was said to have achieved enlightenment in that very lifetime. He went from, you know, in one life he became a Buddha. And he said great realizations depend on don't depend on the teacher. They depend less on the teacher's level of realization than on the level of devotion of the student. So he was saying that he said if you have great devotion, then you achieve great realizations. If you have medium devotion, you achieve medium. But it was because of the level of those two things. One is the level of the level at which that person practices the instructions with energy, and the other is because of the kind of karma they create in relation to their teacher, right? Like in other words, so that they create so much, because of the that they also create more virtuous karma more quickly too. So that's just the first benefit. Then the other ones are we please all the Buddhas. The others are we're not harmed by Mars or evil friends. That one's an important one. Like, so that would be like this. Like there is that if you really have devotion, let's say to the Dalai Lama or to one of your teachers, right? Like in other words, otherwise, if you don't, then like the Dalai Lama comes and says, practice nonviolence, right? And then somebody else comes along, like in our society, there's tons of people come along and say practice violence, right? And so if you don't have much devotion, then you think, well, Dalai Lama's cool, that's good advice, and the person who comes along and says, stand up for yourself and tell somebody off and whatever, like be rude to them or something, and you think, well, that's good, Dalai Lama's good advice, that's good advice, like you sort of follow whichever you feel like in the moment, right? But when you have like really strong devotion, right, then even when somebody comes along and provokes you, right, then you think, okay, well, maybe many people will say, get even, right? But Dalai Lama says, practice forgiveness. So if your devotion's not so strong, then if you're in the mood to practice forgiveness, you practice forgiveness. If you're not, if you're in the mood, if you're in a bad mood, then you, try to get even, right? But if you have that kind of devotion to the Dalai Lama of faith, that's really like actually seeing him as the Buddha, seeing him as more kind, right? If you have that kind of, you can see how the practitioner then would be like, it's a totally irrelevant, like, you can see that like, and again, it's true actually. I'll give an example, like with the Dalai Lama, right? He teaches that. And if you see like an average person in the audience, right? Even an average Tibetan in the audience, right? They're like, oh, that's cool. Then they go back to do business, and I'm not putting somebody down. I'm just saying like a normal person, right? They're there and they're like, they hear the Dalai Lama and they say, that's awesome. Then they go back to doing business and somebody tries to cheat them, and they get really mad and try to, like cheat the person back, right? But then like if you watch Lama Zopa Rinpoche when he's with the Dalai Lama, unbelievable devotion to the Dalai Lama, right? And then like when somebody tries to cheat him, he's like, oh, the Dalai Lama said do this. And he's like so happy, like, oh, this is my chance to practice Dalai Lama's advice. Great. And and he practices forgiveness to the person who's trying to cheat him and gives him a present or something like that. And he feels, right, it's because of his devotion to the teaching, to his teachers, that he does that. Whereas the person who's kind of like, Dalai Lama's cool, but, but my mom said it's good to get even, or my dad said, or my friend said. Then it's like they don't always follow the advice much, or they don't. So you can see the difference there of, like, I'm just giving you an example of harm by evil friends. That if you have that level of devotion to the Dalai, I'm just giving you an example of the Dalai Lama, right? Then like you focus on his advice of compassion and so on, right? But otherwise, like if you're buddies, you're out with friends, and they say, oh, come on, let's go do this, then it doesn't have as much influence. So it literally, this is not just some like, what's the word? This isn't some esoteric thing. It's like, it's a practical thing. Right? Another one is your delusions and negative actions naturally cease. Right? And that also, just think of it this way. Like actually, I just read a quote from, I think it was Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, who was the Dalai Lama, one of the Dalai Lama's teachers. And he was emphasizing this point where he was saying, if you spend time around enlightened beings, right, and like bodhisattvas and Buddhas, then naturally your own qualities will go up. And they were saying, but and he was saying that's why it's good to spend time with spiritual friends and with gurus, and is that naturally your behavior and your, if you spend time with them and you feel devotion for them, naturally your behavior starts improving. He was saying, and the opposite's also true, right? In other words, if you start spending time around people who are doing negative actions, then of course your behavior and your afflictions get worse. And that's true, right? Even with people's facial expression, right? Even, in other words, like you're hanging around people and they're angry and they're agitated, and if you're around them enough, you start feeling angry and agitated and annoyed, and like you're around a lot of people who are annoyed easily and you start getting more annoyed. That's quite true, right? Whereas if you're around people who are incredibly practicing, right? And who are filled with compassion and who forgive, and who when others try to provoke them, they don't react, then your mind starts to become more peaceful. So it's by relating to to enlightened beings like that. That makes sense, right?
Sounds like what you're saying is that like it's just like your devotion to the teachings in general, but if that's not as tangible, so you need like a person there to.
Yeah, exactly.
That's really what it's about, kind of.
Yeah, because actually the teacher really just represents. In other words, like, well, actually I'll share that. Like, Yeah, it's true actually. Like if you look at, I mean, actually, if you look at it, if you look at the Dalai Lama or Lama Zopa or something, right? I mean, actually, all they are is the teachings. That's one thing. It's like if you actually watch their behavior, right? Like you watch the Dalai Lama. I mean, I've tried this. Like actually, if you watch Lama Zopa, I'll give the example of Lama Zopa. Like if you watch him and you just like I've tried it before, and you wait for something that's not Dharma, it never happens. Like so, in other words, like I just look at him, I go, he is Lam Rim. Like one day I was watching Lama Zopa as he was interacting with me, and I thought, you know, you take the Lam Rim book and you take. I was like looking, and I go, like if you took a Lam Rim book and you took Lama Zopa is a living person. You know, he's interacting and he's joking. I mean, he's not like formulaic in a way. He's joking around, and he's playful. I was looking, I was like, nothing he does is not Lam Rim. In other words, everything he does can be encapsulated. You know, so he makes a joke, and then you realize that joke has a meaning of something in the stages of the path to enlightenment. He acts silly or something like that. It acts with, you know, like to try to, you realize he's doing it because somebody, you know, he doesn't usually act silly, but I'm giving an example of like, if he's around young people or somebody who's like, who's immature, then he acts like he might make some silly jokes. And then he actually listens to even the jokes themselves, and they encapsulate some teaching of Dharma. You can't find anything that isn't the teaching. So yeah, exactly. Like in other words, the teacher is just, like the real teachers actually are the teachings, just in a physical form. Like if you watch them, you realize that's actually true. Like that nothing they do is outside of the teachings. And so yeah, so it's not different. It's not like your devotion to the teacher and your devotion to the teachings are two separate things, because all the teachers is the teachings, and they're not anything else. In a way. I mean, those are some of the qualities of the really great teachers. Is that there are, like, it's almost like they're an embodiment of the teachings themselves, and you can't find something that's not the teaching. So yeah, so I agree with you that it's like your devotion to the teachings and your devotion to the teacher are not separate. Yeah, so and then all your realizations, and then these are similar, all your realizations of the path and levels increase. Another one is you'll never lack virtuous friends in your future lives. So that creates karma, and that's part of karma. You won't fall to the lower realms, you'll effortlessly accomplish your temporary and ultimate wishes. Those are the 8 benefits. The 8 faults are the opposite of those. But does that get the feeling across? I don't know, do you have more questions? Like get the feeling across of it? But it is really true, so like, you can see why, if you start to think about that though, you can see why the people who had really great devotion achieved enlightenment quickly, and the ones who didn't, it's more, you know, it's not so quick, is because their relationship to the teacher is their relationship to the teachings, like you said, and also, well, and also this thing, like, I just want to say that too, like, that when you recognize also that, like, there's a teaching, I don't know if we went over this enough, but I'll just say it because I think it's important, that the teachings on karma also, because I said like one is following the advice, right, and then the other is creating good karma in relation to them, and so that's important too. And the reason why is this: in the teachings on karma, there are various factors that make karma powerful. Right? You know, like there are different, like for example, if you do something over and over again, that's one of the things that makes it a more powerful karma than if you rarely do that, right? So somebody who, you know, so for example, in a negative karma, right, somebody who steals once, that's a negative karma, right? But somebody whose livelihood is stealing, where they steal all the time, of course it becomes like a heavier load, karmically. But so one of the factors that makes karma more powerful is your relationship to that other person. And so they give examples where like somebody who's been kind to you, it's worse, you know, so for example, if you hurt somebody, right? It's worse to hurt somebody who's been incredibly kind to you than to hurt a stranger. Both are bad, but like, even on a human level, you can feel that, right? Like in other words, like, you know, like, what's the right way to say it? You know, sometimes you meet people like that where, when they're, like if they, you know, if they were really cruel, like if they were really mistreated their own parent or grandparent or something like that, who if the parent was kind to them, like an example of abuse, I'm not talking about that, but like a kind, you know, and then like you realize you did something bad, it feels even worse, because it's like, oh, you know, than somebody who, if you were mean to somebody, like who you don't know on the telephone through a telemarketing or something, it feels heavier because it is heavier. And so the idea in Buddhism with karma is that the more kind somebody is to you, it's not from their side, it's from your side. In other words, they've been incredibly kind to you, and then if you do something negative to them, it's a heavier karma, right? So the idea here is that, you know, so if you took somebody as your teacher, let's say the Dalai Lama, right? So if you took him as your teacher, and then he revealed the actual path to enlightenment to you, and did and all that, and did that for years and years, you know, the way the Dalai Lama does, right? He travels the world and is so kind to others. And you know, so if somebody's doing that and then you treat them badly, that's a heavier negative karma. But on the other hand, if you do something positive in relation to them, it's a more powerful positive karma because of the relationship. Does that make sense? So that's one of the reasons why, also that relationship to the teacher. So if you view the Dalai Lama as the Buddha, who's been, you know, the most kind to you, you know, then because of that relationship, it becomes easy to create so much more positive karma if you do positive actions in relation to him. Does that kind of make sense? So it's a karmic relationship thing also. That specifically comes out of the kindness, though. Does that make sense? And they actually say that. I'll just share that because I thought it was interesting. In the Buddhist teachings, they actually say that. So they give that, you know, since that's one of the things that makes karma powerful. They often use that as an example where they say, so when you know, sorry, if you repay the kindness of others, and if somebody who's been kind to you, whether it's your teacher, you know, or some mentor, or some kind, you know, kind people in your life, that if you treat them with kindness, you know, so like for example, you know, like when your mom's sick and then you're helping her, right, that kind of thing. They say actually that's an extremely powerful karmic action. But so then if you view your teacher as the most kind, like we just contemplated on, right, then that's incredibly powerful way of thinking. So it's another reason why it speeds the path. Any other question? Comments? So maybe let's decide which order to do this in. Maybe I'll just keep talking a little longer, and then we'll do the group. I was thinking about the group exercise, but maybe we'll do a little more since we're on this. We already got into it, so I think I'll just keep going a little bit. So the idea, right? So actually, I want to continue on a little further. So this is, you know, I had already said, right, that and we know this, that in the stages of the Path to Enlightenment text, this whole topic comes first, which is, I think, you know, for Westerners, it's a little difficult. Maybe that's why it's not the first subject in the discovering Buddhism, because it's a challenging subject in some ways, but actually. So I just want to say this. So what's the realization of this subject? If you gain the realization, it just means, actually, the way Lama Zopa describes it is then, like whenever you think of or see your teacher, you immediately think that's the Buddha. And whenever you see the Buddha, then you think that's my teacher. Right? So you see it, you know, if you see a statue of the teacher, you feel on a feeling level, it feels like, you don't feel like, oh, that's just something, you know, and it's like this. It's like, you know, I just want to give an analogy here of what that means, right? Like, you know, if you see somebody else's family photos, you know, it's like some of those people joke, right? It's like really boring. You know, if you go to somebody's house and they say, "Let me show you all my family photos," right? And you don't know anybody in their family. You know, they start taking out and showing you like page after page. And you think, like, you know, you smile and nod and say, "Oh, that's nice." But in your mind, you're thinking, "Oh, this is really boring," right? And so, so at the beginning, right? If you don't see the guru as the Buddha, right? Then, you know, if somebody shows you pages of Buddha pictures, it's a little like, you know, oh, this is Amitabha, this is Parvachana, it could feel a little like that, right? But if you see the guru as Buddha, then actually seeing Buddhas, right, is like family photo. It's like your own family, not like somebody else's family. Does that make sense? Like it would feel like that. In other words, that's the feeling that should happen. It would feel like, does that make sense, the difference? I'm just giving a good analogy. But then at the beginning it would feel like somebody else's family. But then if you see, like, so that when you see them, you think, oh, that's Dalai, like, you know, or that's Lama Zopa, or that's whoever, that's Dalai Lama. Like, in other words, like, you get a feeling of closeness to all the Buddhas. Does that make sense? So you see the Buddhas and you think that's my guru. You see your guru and you think, oh, that's the Buddha, right? So, and when that happens spontaneously and naturally, so at the beginning, right, it becomes effortful. Like at first it seems foreign, right? Like, what do you mean they're a Tibetan person, right? Or a Western person, or a Chinese person? It doesn't matter. It's not. Could be any, you know, whatever. But at the beginning it seems foreign. Then there reaches a point, if you keep doing these contemplations, where through effort it can feel that way, right? So you might see them and think, oh, they're a normal person, but then if you think about it, you think, oh, wait, but their kindness, and they did this, and they did that, and if the Buddha manifests. So eventually when you see Dalai Lama, it takes some effort, and then you think, oh yeah, he's the Buddha, right? But then there comes a point where it becomes spontaneous, so that just seeing the picture, you know, you see a picture of the Dalai Lama on an advertisement or something, and immediately you think, oh, you feel that's the Buddha, right? And then when you see a statue of the Buddha, you feel, oh, that's the Dalai Lama, it's no difference, you know what I mean? Then that's the realization of that. And then there come, so then the question arises, how do you devote to the teacher? right? How to, through, so then there's a whole thing, devotion through, and there are three, they list three kinds, through gifts, through service, and through practice. And what they say is that the most important, of course, the most important offering to the teacher is the offering of practice, right? So that means practicing what the teacher teaches, right? Because actually you get no benefit. Like, and that's very true, right? Like, in other words, if somebody goes to the Dalai Lama's teaching and listens and then doesn't practice at all, then actually was there any benefit at all in going? I'm not sure. Like, maybe there's some imprint or something like that. But there's very little benefit, right? If you don't at least try to practice what the Dalai Lama taught, right? So actually the best offering you can make, right? And this is not difficult, actually, right? I mean, some parts might be difficult, because the Dalai Lama, using the example of Dalai, he teaches a lot of different subjects, right? But anybody can go out and be kind to somebody, right? Like anybody, in other words, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to go meditate on Mahamudra to repay the kindness in this way, right? Or to offer the offering of practice. And Khenpo Rinpoche gives the example, I just want to mention it. Like he was giving the example when he taught on the easy path. He had said, there's one teaching that says, at the very first teaching actually says, when you're going to meditate, first clean your room while thinking I'm cleaning my mind, right, basically, right? And so he said, so if you go home and do that, right, if you clean your meditation room while thinking, okay, this is clean, as I clean this, I think I'm also cleaning, the purpose of this is to clean my mental afflictions, then that's an offering of practice. Does that make sense? So it doesn't mean, offering of practice doesn't mean that you don't have to say, some people, actually I used to do that, like, I read of offering of practice, and I thought, oh, that meant like, that you go to your teacher and say, after you've realized emptiness, you can go and say, oh, I've realized emptiness now. And that's when you can offer practice. I just didn't know. I was like, what does that mean? Because I read the life of Miller Ape, and I was like, well, his offering of practice was pretty advanced, so. But then, but actually the teaching, then as you study more, it's clear, right? That just, like, if you clean your room by thinking, I'm cleaning my mind, I'm cleaning out the afflictions, I'm cleaning out the stains of my mind, then you're offering practice. Does that make sense? If you do water bowls or light a candle while thinking, I'm offering this with bodhicitta, then that's, if you just think, if you practice kindness to one person, right, or one animal, and you think, they're precious, right, then that's the best offering of practice, really, right? In other words, offering service to some other person or some other creature, or or actually even a better one is if somebody treats you rudely and you stay patient, then that's an offering. Does that make sense? So the most important offering is to offer practice, and again, it's just like, but in this case you're relating it back. You're thinking, okay, my teacher taught me that, they were very kind, so now it's my responsibility when this person treats me badly to be patient with them. So that's the offering of practice. So does that kind of make sense? The other two, I'll just go through them briefly. So one of them is offering service. So that's like, actually, that's, I want to say that too though. So if you think about that karmic relationship thing, right? Then it becomes, actually it's like, I was thinking about this the other day when I was thinking, oh, okay, I got to talk about this today. And I started laughing to myself because I thought, what's the word? Buddhas are hard to buy for. That's what I thought. it's a problem, actually. Because they don't want it either, right? Like, in other words, I think of like Khenpo Rinpoche, right? Like you go see it, like, there's nothing, Actually, sometimes it's funny with, like, they're all the same, actually. Like with Khenpo Rinpoche, sometimes I would think, okay, this really nice, like, Tibetan Vajra and bell or something like that are very pretty. So if I bought something like that and offered, he's like, oh, okay, thank you. And then you see, like, then I go up to T and Kel and it's on, like, some shelf in the back of some, whatever, like, like, it's like, he could care less. It's just me. I mean, he's happy because he sees me trying to follow a teaching or something, like, I would say, okay, offer something. So I would do that, and oh, okay, good. And then you see it's on some shelf somewhere, like, or with Lama Zopa, right, he would give it away to the next person. Like, oh, thank you. So that it's not like, I guess what I'm getting at there is that, that offering service and offering gifts, the point here is not, sorry to say it, it's easy to misinterpret that, but the main point is, you do it, and it's like, if you're doing, the main point is you have to, if you're doing it, you recognize I'm doing it to create my own virtuous karma. Does that make sense, kind of? So it's not that you're doing it, and actually, there's, if you choose a teacher correctly, then they are hard to buy for. And they don't want anything. That's a sign that you've chosen the correct teacher. If they seem like they really want stuff, that's probably something wrong, actually. But also offering service can be offering service to this is an important point, right? Because like with a lot of the teachers, Actually, because what's the right way to say it? Like sometimes offering service can actually, if anything, it's often annoying to them, right? In a way, I mean, I'm joking a little bit, but like some of the traditional teachings say, oh, wash their feet or something. Like, actually, no Tibetan wants that. Like, there's like, unless they're sick or in hospital or something, but there are like sutras that say that. And if like I've seen sometimes where people ask them, they're kind of like, that's not what they want. But if the sutras say, whatever. But so that's not the point. But the point is for one's own karma. But to me, there are very practical ways to do this, right? Which are like, if you look, for example, at the Dalai Lama, right? Well, none of us are likely to get the chance to cook him dinner. He's a little busy. But actually, with the Dalai Lama, it's quite possible, right? Because there are causes that the Dalai Lama cares about, right? And not all of them are about Tibet, right? But like nonviolence, things like that, right? And nonviolent political change. So if you go out and make an effort, at some cause that's so it's in your mind, right? So if let's say there's some cause going on about nonviolence, like whether it's the mistreatment of animals or the mistreatment of people in a certain place, so if you participate in that way in some way, right? You sign a letter, or you do a campaign, or you go to a rally, or you go and vote about something or whatever related to that. If you do it thinking I'm offering this to the Dalai Lama, then that's valid, right? Because that's part of his life mission is to promote nonviolence, right? See what I mean? Like, so this offering doesn't have to be directly to them. And the same thing with like, actually, take the example of, Rebecca's service, right? When she offers, like, does work for the center, right? Like, that'd be an offering to Lama Zopa, right? Now, does Lama Zopa know on any given day that she's doing that? I don't know, or is it? That's not the issue. The issue is in her mind. If she thinks I'm coming and doing the water bowls and setting up the statues as an offering to Lama Zopa, then that's an offering of service to Lama Zopa, right? And it's meaningful. Does that make sense? So it's mainly in your own mind is where that matters. Does that make sense? Kind of? And so again, like if a teacher has a center and you help the center, or if the teacher has a cause they care about and you do something related to that cause, then whether and actually whether you tell them or you don't tell them that, it's mainly in your own mind that it becomes an offering of service. Does that kind of make sense? But it makes it more karmically powerful if you do it in that way. Does that make sense? So if you think, or it's because of the relationship. Does that make sense? So if you think, if you have that feeling of devotion, right? Oh, Dalai so kind to me. He's the Buddha. He cares about this issue of nonviolence. I also care about it. So I'm doing this with that kind of feeling in my heart. That's more powerful than if you only just said, well, I think this is a good cause, so I'm going to do it. And that would encompass both. Does that make sense? You're still feeling it's a good cause, but you're doing it also out of relationship. It's kind of like the difference between, walking, like sometimes those walks, right? If somebody does a walk for breast cancer, let's say, that's meaningful, right? But then you see the feeling on a person if their mom, if their mom is a survivor of breast cancer or died from breast cancer and they're doing it. There's a different level of emotional feeling there. So it's like that. It's mainly the emotional relationship to the service that is what changes. Again, that's just an analogy, but you get the feeling there of why it becomes more karmically powerful. There was something else I was going to say about that. Oh, and I want to say one other thing about the offering of practice. So one is, the teachers teach tons, right? So it's not difficult to read their teachings or hear their teachings, and then, and many of them on compassion and so on are quite straightforward. The Dalai Lama also says, like, study, right? Everywhere the Dalai Lama goes, he always says that, right? He says modern Buddhists shouldn't just be like, shouldn't just go like this and not know anything. He says study. So if so it's actually an offering. So if you read a book on philosophy or something, Buddhist philosophy, that's it, right? If you think I'm doing this because I'm following the Dalai Lama said, right, to study deeply, to study, like not just to take some simple, like, oh yeah, the Dalai Lama said this, so I believe it, but to actually study, contemplate and analyze. So then, even if you're reading a Dharma book, you can say that's an offering of practice to the Dalai Lama, right? Because the Dalai Lama is requesting people, please, if you say you're Buddhist, then really study Buddhism, know what Buddhism is in a deep way. Don't just sort of. So again, then you're just reading a book can be an offering of practice. Does that make sense, kind of? Because you're following the advice of your teacher, then. And not just being superficial in your approach. And then I guess one other thing I was going to say too, and I said this briefly last time, I think, Jen, when you asked the question. And it was this, it was the question of, like, you asked that question, it was the last time before about, was it reasonable to write a letter or ask a question or call or, something with someone like Kensher Moshe or Lama Zopa or other teachers. And there also, I'll say, like, Lama Zopa says this actually in this book, The Heart of the Path, and he's always emphasized this point, is that because of this issue of the relationship, right, that then there is a lot of benefit. You know, so if you ask advice of, you know, so in other words, and anybody can do that. You know, you don't have to, you know, anybody can write a letter, write an email or something. And so if there's something, but I actually, this is just a personal advice I'll give them, is don't ask a question you don't want to know the answer to, of course, you know, because that's not good. But it is good, actually, if you have time to do a retreat, you know, to ask advice and follow the advice. And I'll just say that from experience of, like, I've known many people like that where it's really valuable, actually. You know, if you get let's say you have a chance to do a 1-week retreat, right? Like, you know, it's okay, you can choose for yourself. You can say, I'm just going to do this retreat, that's fine, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you have a chance, it's quite nice, actually, to ask your teacher, like, is there a particular retreat I should do right now? Because sometimes my observation has been that, you know, sometimes they'll say, well, do whatever you want, that's fine. But oftentimes they'll give some advice that's quite suitable to the person and that you wouldn't have thought of necessarily. Like, that's really helpful. Does that make sense? Where they'll sort of emphasize something you might not have thought to emphasize, and then it's quite good for you if you do it that way. So I don't think people should be shy to ask. That's all I guess I'm saying. Because then it creates more relationship and more, you know, I mean, and all these benefits, right, of the speed of the practice. So Lama Zopa emphasized that. He says, you know, if you do a positive action versus if you do a positive action that your teacher, if you have devotion to the teacher and see them as Buddha and then you do it with that in mind, then there's much more benefit in doing it with the second. Does that make sense? Even though the external action of doing a retreat or offering service somewhere, whatever, is the same, because it has a different feeling to it for the person. Does that make sense? So, but again, that's only true if you have that devotion. Otherwise, it doesn't really do that. Right? Whereas if you just say, it's because of the relationship, it's what makes it more powerful. And I'll give one more analogy there. Lama Zopa actually, you know, on the benefits, the 8 benefits and the 8 faults, Lama Zopa actually said, he gives an analogy, a metaphor, where he says, you know, the teacher is like like those electric wires, but not just the normal ones, the high voltage electric wire. That's the analogy he gives. He says the spiritual teacher is like a high voltage electric wire or something. And the analogy there he's giving is, you know, so if you plug into it in the correct way, safely, with the correct right fuse box, you know, and the correct outlets and everything like that, you know, then it can light a whole city, you know. But on the other hand, if you relate wrongly to that, then you get hurt. You know, like it's not helpful, right? Or so you wouldn't just like you wouldn't just take a sort of a pin with a wire and stick it into a high voltage electric wire thing that's going to light up your house. You would just get hurt. So he gives the analogy of that, saying, you know, so that's saying, so you approach, it is good to ask, but you ask, or make sure you ask the right question that you want to know the answer to, that you want to do. Don't ask something you don't want to do, right? That doesn't make sense. As if you don't want, you know, so you wouldn't go, like if you don't want to do a 6-month retreat, don't say, what 6-month retreat should I do? That would be kind of stupid. Okay, anyway, are there questions about all of that? I just wanted to go through, but you get the idea. So the 3 kinds of offering, and actually they go from lower to higher. So the lowest level of offering is physical gifts. The middle level is service, which is what I was just talking about, and then the highest level of practice of offering is practice. And actually, I'll point out also, like, for those of you who are reading the life story of Milarepa, actually on this point there's a famous quote from Milarepa, right? When he showed up at Marpa's place, he was totally dead broke, right? He had nothing. And so he said to Marpa, I can't offer you, know, he said usually when somebody first shows up at their teacher's house like that, they would offer some symbolic something or other, right? And he showed up and he said, I have nothing at all to offer, and he said, but I'll offer my practice, you know. And Marpa said that was the best offering he had received, you know. And so he didn't need to offer any other thing, you know. And that's why, and then Milarepa was the one who became enlightened in one life of all of Marpa's students. So that is definitely the best offering. But what I'd like to do now is let's break up into small groups, and like we always do. But this time, what I was thinking, just like we'll relate it to the same kind of subject we've been doing. But this time, let's do it this way. Since we were talking about the benefits of proper relating and the faults of not relating properly, what I thought to do this time is a little different. Like last time we raised qualms, but this time actually I want to do like we sometimes do. Because actually, when you look at the meditation here, in many of the texts, actually, it's a little bit of a debate with oneself. You know, so like in other words, the idea here, you know, in the meditations is that you say, you know, Well, I can view them, you know, they, sort of say it. You can view them one way, or you can view them the other, right? Because that's up to you how you view anybody, including your teachers. But what I thought we would do this time is just like, almost like a debate. So break up into groups of 4 or so, around 4. And so half the group should take the position, it's not reasonable to view the teacher as Buddha, and half the group say, yeah, it benefits you to do that. And just explore why it would benefit or why it would not be a reasonable thing to do. Does that make sense? But do it in the form of a debate this time. Is that clear, like what I mean? Okay, so go ahead and do that. It's actually quite interesting that in the Tibetan monasteries in particular, like what the young monks, and even the middle-aged monks, I guess, do, right, is they spend way more time debating than they do studying, actually. You know, in other words, they sit with Ken Trebuchet or somebody like that for a few hours, like 2 hours. But then they might, especially the young ones, I mean, in the old days, they would debate all night, actually. You know, for like 8, 10 hours. Because that's where, you know, then they would go read more. Yeah, but then actually, then they go to class again, and then they read a little more. They come back and ask questions of their teacher, because they're like, I just lost debate. How do you know, what's the, you know, what is the meaning of this?
It's like an intense analytical meditation, right? It's
yeah.
just with a bunch of other people.
Yeah, exactly. And it sharpens your, yeah, it's a more intense way of, yeah, it is an analytical meditation. And it's quite beneficial, and it also motivates you then to study more. You know, then you start to get the, otherwise you just kind of say, oh, that's interesting, oh, that, like, otherwise there's a danger of studying like a tourist or something, you know, oh, that's it, oh, that, you know, oh, there's the Taj Mahal, oh, there's the, you know, whereas when you start debating, it becomes like, you want to know more because you want to go back and, you know, your own questions arise, right? You say, oh, that doesn't make sense to me, or something. And to me, that's a really good sign. Like, I know there is, both for myself, if I read something, I go, what? That doesn't make sense. Like, that's a good sign, right? Or in class sometimes when I see somebody go like that, then I think, oh, that's a good sign, you know, because that means that means then you want to learn more, right? And I just want to say a few other things, a few other things. Like, so about a few more things about this whole issue. So one is, I think this is a traditional example, right? Atisha, right? The great master Atisha, right? Who was incredibly important in Tibetan history, a great master in India, an Indian master, right? It's said that he had like, I don't know, somewhere I can look it up, but I think it was 150 something gurus or something. And so he had realized emptiness directly. So he had the highest view of emptiness. So he had not just studied, but had realized the consequentialist, right? The Prasangika Madhyamaka view of Chandrakirti. And the guru who he considered most kind to him was Suvarnadvipa from Indonesia, who was a holder of the mind-only school. So it's a less refined view of emptiness, right? So Atisha went there and studied bodhicitta with him and realized bodhicitta while studying with Suvarnadvipa. So the question is, what raises this though, is when Suvarnadvipa was teaching him, right, when he was teaching about bodhicitta, it was incredibly beneficial. When he taught about emptiness though, he was teaching a view that Atisha already knew, had already realized, not just knew intellectually, but had actually gained the realization, was not as profound as the view that Atisha had already understood, right? So the question I would raise is, and yet, like it said that when Atisha heard Suvarnadvipa's name, he would put his hands over his head and start crying, start weeping at the level of gratitude, because he felt so much gratitude to Suvarnadvipa. So the question I want to raise is, like, just to think about for a moment is, so how did Atisha do that? Right? When Atisha's there in class, right, he's sitting in class in Indonesia, and he comes to the part about emptiness, right? And his guru, who he's like so unbelievably devoted to, is explaining a view of emptiness, right? He's sitting there in class. Atisha, who's a great pandit already, right? And already was like, you know, had studied at these great monasteries in India. And he's sitting there listening. When he's teaching about bodhicitta, this teacher's teachings are absolutely amazing, right? Then he comes to the section on mind-only school, and he was teaching the mind-only school view of emptiness correctly from the mind-only school's perspective. But Atisha already knew experientially that was not, both intellectually and experientially, that was not the most subtle way of presenting, and it was not, had already realized the more profound view of emptiness in that. And Suvarnadvipa never taught the Madhyamika view. He never taught the Prasangika. In other words, he never taught that more subtle view to Atisha, or anybody, as far as I know. So imagine, how did Atisha, you know, like, because I think some of the stuff we're talking about, right? So what was that like for Atisha, right? Like, and one thing I can say for sure is Atisha didn't think, one thing is definitely true, if you read Atisha's life, is he didn't think, I know more than this guy. Like, Atisha definitely didn't take that attitude. Right? And he didn't take the attitude like, huh, maybe I should, you know, like, what's the word, you know, like, I'm smarter than my guru, how cool I am, wow, like, you know, he didn't go around thinking that. And yet, he also didn't think, gosh, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the realization of emptiness I had was incorrect. He had absolute conviction in his own view of emptiness, and he taught that. When he went back to India and then to Tibet, he taught the Prasangika view of emptiness, of Chandrakirti, everywhere. You know, like, so in other words, he felt absolute confidence in his own understanding of emptiness, and yet he had no disrespect for his teacher, right, who taught a different view of emptiness. I'm just saying, I'm not trying to answer a question, I'm just raising a question. Like, it's interesting, right? And Atisha, yet he had teachers who had taught him the Prasangika view of emptiness, right? He had teachers, and he had felt very devoted to them, but when somebody said who was most kind to you, he would start crying and say Suvarna Vipa, because he taught Bodhicitta. So I guess I'm just raising that to ask, you know, to think about, right? I'll raise another question like that, right? Even the Buddha himself, right, who taught the ultimate, who taught the Prasangika, you know, he taught the teachings that teach the ultimate view of emptiness, right? There are other times where he taught a much less subtle view. Actually, he taught a pretty, like, what compared to those teachings would be a much grosser position. And that's why there are many books. Lama Tsongkhapa wrote a book called Distinguishing the Interpretive and Definitive Meanings of the Teachings of the Buddha, right? Where he says, you know, the Buddha taught this, but it's not ultimately, what's there to say? It's not, like, he wasn't saying it's wrong, but he was saying it's not the most subtle understanding. It's a grosser view about reality. And so, did Lama Tsongkhapa think the Buddha wasn't enlightened when he wrote that book? No. Right? Like, what Lama Tsongkhapa was saying was, actually Lama Tsongkhapa's stance, right, was, well, you know, this was incredibly kind for this particular disciple in this story, right? Whereas the Buddha didn't teach randomly. He taught when somebody walked up to him, right? And so for that person, that was a very skillful teaching, but that person wasn't ready for the most subtle presence. That's basically what Lama Tsongkhapa was saying, was that the person who walked up to the Buddha on, you know, May 5th and whatever this year, you know, something like that, was not ready for that most subtle presentation. So of course the Buddha didn't teach the most subtle presentation. He would have harmed that person, actually. Right? That person might have, actually, it even says that some people, it says, why did the Buddha teach this other view? And it says sometimes, because if he had taught this other subtler view to certain kinds of people, they would have become a nihilist and thought nothing exists, and so that would have been harmful to them. So you don't teach something subtle, so subtle that it would harm the person. And they use the analogy of different kinds of medicine, right? Like, you don't give, you don't give powerful medicine to somebody with a flu, right? Like, actually, you usually don't give anything to somebody with a flu, right? There is this, you know, like you give them liquids or something. You know, it depends on the person's illness what you give them. So I just wanted to say that's one interesting. So I'm just raising questions. I'm not trying to answer anything. But then I do want to give I do want to share a couple more points though. So one point that I think is important that I want to be sure I cover before we finish this today is this. Actually, two more points. So one is, what do you, like, so if you're, and actually Lama Zopa addresses this in his book, and all the teachers do. So let's say you analyze a teacher and you decide they have the 10 qualities of Mahayana teacher and so on, and then they give you advice either that you can't follow. There are different categories here. One is you can't follow it, right? Like they say, you know, fly in the sky now. Right? Well, I'm not kidding, right? Or they give you advice that contradicts the teachings of the Buddha. Right? They say, go hurt somebody. Or, you know, or let's go have sex. Right? You know, that's not advised, right? To teach sex with your teacher. Or they give you advice to steal from somebody. Right? Or they give you advice, something like that. So it seems to contradict the advice of the Buddha. Yeah, I'll leave it those two, right? Then what are you supposed to do? And so, actually, what the teachings say is, if you can't do it, or if you don't think it, or if it seems to contradict reason in the teachings of the Buddha, then what you're supposed to do is go to your teacher and say, oh, I can't do that. And here's why. And so it's interesting, right? So you're supposed to view your teacher as the Buddha, but you're not supposed to do everything your teacher says if it contradicts reason, if it contradicts the teachings of the Buddha, or if you can't do it. And what actually I want to emphasize is, because Lama Zopa Rinpoche makes it very clear in his teaching, is he says a few things. One is he says, his advice is very clear. He says, in those instances, don't disrespect your teacher, just say, I can't do it. And he said, whatever you do, don't get angry at them for telling you something that contradicts the Buddha. You just say, I can't do it for them. And then he says, and then Lama Zopa goes through, actually, he says, sorry to say this. that how to relate to those moments depends on you, actually, on your level, right? So, and what he's pointing out there is this, is, you know, there are some stories in the past, like, and the Dalai Lama often points this out, there are some stories in the past of great bodhisattvas like Naropa, actually, right? Who did these things that actually, for anybody else would have been quite harmful. You know, like he did sort of crazy things. Actually, at one point he stole from his teacher, Tilopa said, wow, the food at that wedding looks really good, I would like some. And Naropa went over and said, can I have some food? And they said no, and then I think he like took some, and they beat him up, and you know, like, you know, there's like a whole funny story, and then Tilopa came along and says, what are you doing, laying there all bloody or something? And Naropa says, you said you wanted some food, and they didn't want to give it, so I tried to take it, and then the guy beat me up, and you know, Tilopa sort of, whatever, and then their relationship was on from there, but the point here is this, is the Dalai Lama says, you know, that was Naropa. And if you're Naropa, then fine, do what you want. You know? But if you're not Naropa, stay with your own level of, in other words, you have to stay with your own level of wisdom and understanding, right? And so, the point there is this, is that you have to have, that still, it's quite interesting, that the point here is this, is that you have to have responsibility to compare what your teacher says to what the Buddha said, right? And to reason, and then to give feedback, right? And to have a relationship. And what Lama Zopa gives examples is he says, actually, I think well, he gives different examples of different advice, but one point I guess is this, is actually I want to say a couple things. One is, you know, the Buddha himself when he was dying, right, said, what was the exact quote? You know, something about I can't the exact words, but it's like be your own lamp, right? Be your own, that, in other words, that to practice the teachings is your own responsibility. And you have to rely on your own reason, right? When he was dying, he said, rely on your own reason. And rely on my teachings, but think about them, analyze them, and put them into practice according to your own wisdom, right? And so the point here is this, is that we still have a responsibility, actually, right? So even when you're viewing your guru as the Buddha, you have to analyze your own level of wisdom and ability. You have to analyze what you understand at this point of the teachings of the Buddha, and then you have to have a relationship. Does that make sense? Where you say, yeah, I can do that, that'd be great, or I'm not capable of that, or that doesn't seem right to me. And that's the relationship that you're supposed to have. Does that make sense? And I want to say a couple more things about that. Like, for our own practice, and I'll say this is true, I think, is that what's useful then is to think, well, why, you know, like, because what a teacher, like, in Buddhism, this is often true, actually, that what a teacher says, and the Buddha, right, if Lama Tsongkhapa is pointing out that this was true of the Buddha, then it's certainly true of any other Buddhist teacher. That sometimes the Buddha said things to, like, actually, okay, I'm going to give a different example, actually, because this is quite, I like this example. Sometimes, who was it? Which Lama? There are many Lamas like this, but one is Pabonka Rinpoche, actually. And another is, and there, actually it's true in many, many different Lamas' books. But sometimes you'll be reading a book, right, by a great Tibetan master, where everybody says, oh, they're Buddha Vajradhara, right? And then you read something that's clearly incorrect in their book, right? And one time I remember I was like, wait a second, this isn't even right. You know, like, how can that be? This person's, and then it's clear that actually most Lama, like, actually, I mean, well, actually, I'll share, so I'm trying to remember who it was that wrote this book. There was one famous book about emptiness, actually, where there were many points that were actually not quite about debate. It was a book about, actually, no, I'm sorry, okay. It was a book about debate, and there were many points that were clearly incorrect. Or not, or what's the word? That wouldn't stand up to debate. And so somebody said to Ladi Rinpoche, who was one of the greatest masters alive, well, these are points that even young monks know. Why would this teacher put these things in there? And Ladi Rinpoche said, well, those are the points you'll remember after you read the book, right? In other words, when you go out in the debate courtyard and you try debating that way, and you lose, you're going to understand that point much more deeply, and then you're going to go read other books, and that's why this master did that. In other words, he did it in order to provoke, and I'll say that from my own experience. There were a few times where, like, Khensa Rinpoche did this, where he would say, and then he would either say something, he would say, I don't remember this, or he would say something wrong, and I would go, oh no, wait, like, and I never forgot those points, and then later he would say the other thing in some other context, and I realized, well, he knows perfectly well what he's saying. Whereas he's just playing with it, you know, like he's sort of seeing, are you listening, you know, and so on. And I realized that, I guess what I'm saying is that that's actually a Buddhist, what's the word, pedagogical technique, is sometimes to present a wrong
thing in order to provoke thought and discussion and debate. And it's clear, like in that other book I was mentioning by Poincaré, that's the only reason he did. And this is something he was a great scholar of. So, I mean, there are times where a person, of course, could just make a genuine mistake. But there are times where you look at it and you say, but this is something that he would have known 20 years earlier, before he wrote that book. And it's clearly intentional, and there is at times. And that is an actual teaching technique in Buddhism. So the point I'm getting at here is this, is just because your teacher, you know, you're viewing his teacher as a Buddha, and the teacher says something, there is even the Buddha, in other words, the historical Buddha, clear, and all the great Buddhist masters throughout history did that on purpose. In other words, would present a view in order to provoke deeper discussion and thought. So my point is, and what Lama Zopa Rinpoche is advising is this, is so when your teacher says something that seems to contradict the teachings of the Buddha, what you should do is go back and, you know, I mean, say I can't do that, and then go back and think about it, and think, why did they do that? And it might be useful for you, is the point. Does that make sense, kind of? Whereas, but so the idea is that you don't just do it blindly, but the idea is that you also, out of respect, in other words, that's the version of respect and gratitude, is that you go back and you think, well, this person's been kind to me in the past, and maybe there's something useful about that for me to think about. You know, maybe it's that I need to stand up for myself more. Maybe it's that I misunderstood this other thing, and I need to actually hold more strongly to an understanding of, you know, of something. Maybe, you know, if a teacher, you know, and like that. So I'll give one more example. Like if a teacher seems to do something unethical, the worst thing you can do is say, oh, they're doing something unethical, I guess that's the right path to enlightenment, I'll be unethical too. Like that'd be really foolish, right? Whereas if a teacher does something that looks unethical to you, then your job is to go, wow, like, I guess I need to be more ethical, you know, like, whereas like, the correct response to that would be to say, you know, actually a more useful response would be to say, well, maybe they're trying to show me something about ethics, I better go practice ethics more. It's not to follow the negative example. Does that kind of make sense? And so you have to analyze for yourself those things, to some extent. But anyway, so you get the idea. So I said this last time, that the idea here is that it requires a kind of, I mean, like the example with a t-shirt, it requires a certain mindset. Oh, we gotta stop. Okay, just a couple of the quick things. Another one is this, so the main point, though, that I wanted to emphasize is what I said at the very beginning, which is that the purpose, right, of that relationship is to benefit you, right? If you, so you do those steps, right? You analyze the 10 qualities or the 30 qualities, you know, you do all that beforehand. That if you take the person as your teacher, though, the advice really is, and I just want to be clear about it, the advice is once you take somebody as your teacher in a Buddhist sense, right, viewing them as the Buddha, I'm trying to say this right. You know, that when you do that visualization of imagining all your teachers, you keep them there. Does that make sense? That you keep them there among your teachers. You know, what you do externally in relation to them is a totally different issue. Does that make sense? And so, like, for example, you know, when Atisha left Indonesia, right, he didn't go around teaching the mind-only school's position on emptiness. He taught the Prasangika view, right, because he knew that through reason that was the deeper view of emptiness. He didn't say, out of devotion to my teacher, I'm going to teach a view that I think is not as deep. So he kept his devotion to that teacher, but he didn't teach that. He didn't teach that. He added the Prasangika view into the teachings on compassion that he had learned. And that we should be like Atisha in that way. Does that kind of make sense? That's the correct way to devote to a teacher. He had incredible devotion and faith in his teacher, but he also used, in terms of his behavior, he relied on his own reasoning. I'll raise one more question, and again, it's just a question, then I'll stop. Okay. The question I'll raise is this: so what I just said is all reasonable, I think. But then there's another question. So then, what if your teacher advised you to do something you don't want to do? And how do you judge if that's because you don't want to do it because you're selfish? And you're, like Lama Zopa sometimes says, there are moments where you have to decide, am I going to follow my self-centered, self-cherishing mind or the advice of my teacher? So how do you tell if you're standing up for what's correct because you understand that it contradicts reason and the teachings of the Buddha, or if you're not following advice because you just want to be selfish and like you're lazy, right? You don't feel like doing something difficult. So how do you do that, actually? How do you figure that out?
Well, what do you mean, how do you figure out? Or how do you figure out whether what he told you is right or wrong?
Yeah, like let's say the teacher says do this and it seems quite difficult, right? Well, so how do you, in other words, how do you, like, and then you think, oh, I can't do it, I think it contradicts something. right? How do you tell if you're saying, I don't wanna do it?
That's a good excuse, if you say, you don't wanna do it because, it's difficult for you, so that's, I mean, we know that, we're smart enough to know that.
Yeah.
That if we don't wanna do it because it's just hard for us to do it, that's one thing. If we don't wanna do it because we think that it contradicts the teacher and does something wrong, then we go back to the teacher and ask him. But just because he tells you, you have to get up every morning at 5 o'clock and do offering and meditate for a half hour because it's good for you. You know that is good for you, and you want to do it. But if you have some medical reasons that he doesn't know about, like, I have some needs by which I cannot do that or something, then you have to let him know. But so that, but if he tells you, I don't know, give $10 to everybody you meet in the street every day, and you can't afford it, then you tell him that's not reasonable. But if you can't afford it and he tells you to do it, then it's something you can do. So
Everybody can tell Alessandra's cultivating a lot of wisdom, right?
no,
That's good.
no, really.
No, that's a good answer.
It's just, I think it's just common sense, right?
But like with the example of the money, not necessarily, because if you're kind of clinging to your money, you might feel like you can't afford that when the teacher knows you can. Or even the health excuse, it could be that you're so used to using your medical condition to get out of doing things that, you're saying I have this medical condition that prevents it, but you could just be making an excuse that you're not recognizing.
So this is a good debate.
That's true.
These are the kind of, and I guess what I want to suggest is this, is just that these are the kind of debates you should have with yourself, right? Whereas before you make a decision of what to do, you should have these kind of, I think the debate that you just had with each other, that's actually the debate you should cultivate inside your own mind. And that's, to me, that's part of the process of making the relationship to a teacher beneficial, right? Is to say, well, am I just being lazy and selfish? Or am I being wise? What's actually the real answer? And to keep analyzing, and actually if you go back and talk to your teacher about it and say, this is my struggle, this is what I'm trying to figure out, let's talk about it a little bit, then you'll get a lot of benefit from it, right? Because you're being real and you're being genuine, but you're also really being reasoned, right? You're not just saying, if you just don't do it, then of course that doesn't have any benefit. Anyway, so that, and the last thing I'll just say, just for schedule-wise, is is it next week, I guess, is the retreat, is that right?
I think so, yeah.
And so what I want to say about next week just is this, so next week we'll do the retreat on the Guru thing. So we'll do some more debate, we'll do some more meditation, but also what I want to do next time, because it's quite auspicious that it happens to be also a soak day next time. So what we'll do is we'll do the Guru Puja with soak, which is a very profound practice in relation to Guru. The Guru, actually, it's the most profound practice in some ways. So I think what we'll do is that we'll do all this kind of meditation, but we won't do the Shakyamuni Buddha. We'll do actually the Lama Tsongkhapa Sog thing. So I have verses at the house, but so I just want to say, so if you don't have to, but people who are coming, if you want to bring, we just shared with the group, but if you want to bring just some flowers or fruit or something like that, or then you can bring it to offer during it's like a puja ceremony where you offer to the Guru as the Buddha. So there's no you don't have to bring some, but if you want to do that, then we'll just put it on the altar and we'll offer it, and then we'll sort of share it during the lunch break or something like that with each other. We'll also order still something else, pizza or whatever. But maybe we'll offer all that during the Sog part, because Sog means you make an offering. So I'm just thinking it'd be nice, so whatever so we can do that together, and then we'll sort of have lunch together and share that together, and then we'll go on and keep meditating. But so that is a meditation on Guru Yoga actually. So we'll do it as part of the retreat itself. But okay, and let's just and one last question actually, just a logistical question. I realized that I need to schedule for August and September, and so September we'll figure out. But September we'll just do normal class like this. But in August, what I want to do is just we'll only do one weekend in August. So we're not going to do every week. We won't have class here. We'll just do one weekend, probably at my place next. But it'll have to be a Saturday and a Sunday. And it'll be the whole class of Refuge. So we'll do the whole Discovering Buddhism. It's one of those ones where you can do it in a weekend. So it'll be like a retreat and a teaching combined on Refuge. But are there weeks that are better or worse? Are there weekends rather? Do people have preference of which weekend in August? Or does anybody have a strong feeling about that?
Not the 4th and 5th.
Oh, I can't do the 4th and 5th, so that's easy. But, okay, so I'll send out an email through Gabe, or to Gabe soon, and then we'll schedule some weekend in August. Just that'll be the only thing for Discovering Buddhism in August, and then September we'll pick up again with the classes here. But okay, and let's just dedicate our merit. So by any positive karma that we created together, you can just do, may the Supreme Jewel Bodhicitta, where it is not arisen, may it arise and grow. Where it has arisen, may it not diminish, but increase more and more. In the snowy mountain paradise, you the source of good and happiness, all-powerful Chenrezig, Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara's end. And then also, may each of us here always, in this life and all future lives, always meet with perfect teachers who teach the unmistaken Mahayana path to full enlightenment. May all others also meet perfect teachers, follow the advice, and thereby practice a path of method and wisdom, inseparable, and thereby achieve enlightenment as quickly as